I have been looking forward to making a review for Season 2 of Halo for quite some time. My channel did not exist back when the first season came out, but I could only imagine the kinds of videos I would have came out with after Season 1. Season 1 was a mess. This should have been the perfect opportunity to bring this video game series to life in a show, and also get more people on board that maybe weren't a fan of Halo or maybe weren't gamers. This is an awesome franchise. It's awesome characters, awesome lore, awesome concepts. This should be a show that is successful and loved by many people. Now, the writers attempted to explore more background stuff like the creation of Cortana and the origins of Master Chief, and even some more information on the Spartan program. A deep dive into other characters and lore elements could have been explored as well, and those attempts were made, but not in many great ways. See, the problem with the Halo show is that there are major deviations from Halo's lore and narrative with this so-called silver timeline, as the creators are calling it. This change in timeline means differences in characters and events. There's a lot of issues with the lore and narrative decisions made for the show. But to me, the biggest issues revolve around Master Chief, or should I call him Master Booty Cheek, since he was naked more in the first half than he was in his iconic suit and helmet. Despite a new showrunner and some changes, Halo Season 2 continues to double down on things that ruin the lore, damage the reputation of characters, and ultimately just lead to a narrative which is inconsistent with focus. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was actually excited for this season, not just because I was finally able to make some YouTube content on it, but also because of the details that were coming out prior to the premiere of Season 2. I was happy to hear that there was a new showrunner. David Weiner took over, and I'm glad because the other two guys were horrible. Weiner said in interviews that he wanted this season to be more of a war story, so I was looking forward to that. You know, more action, more battles, and especially since we were going to see the fall of Reach. Unfortunately, my preseason excitement and expectations were not met completely. The fighting in both seasons of this show was exceptional. The big battles were intense and emotional. We had a lot of deaths early on in this season too. The stakes were high in those first 4 episodes leading to that big battle on Reach. But the big battle for Reach came and went pretty quickly. The build-up for it was longer, as a matter of fact. The season did start off with a more darker and more authentic tone. The looming invasion of the Covenant was met with creepy dark scenes with the Covenant that were literally looming in the darkness, picking off Marines one by one in multiple situations. Now let me bring up a few complaints that I did have about combat scenes. We had a lot of repetitive battles, like the same style, the same setup. How many times do we have to see the elites attack while they have their cloak ability up? In Season 1, we had a couple of battles with the Covenant that featured like all elements of the army. We had elites, brutes, we had Covenant vehicles being used, and a lot of that was limited in this season for whatever reason. The big battle in the finale was a space battle, yet we didn't really see much of a focus on the ships fighting or fighters flying around, you know, in dogfighting situations or taking out the big ships. Yes, we saw them there, but the main focus was on Kai leading the Spartan 3s into battle while flying in space after their ship was destroyed. Now that scene where Kai, Perez, and the other Spartans were flying through space, you know, dodging the ship debris and dead bodies, was one of the most disorienting scenes in a show or movie that I've ever seen. The perspectives were constantly changing, flipping from the Spartans flying through the debris field and then switching to Perez's face as she's yelling and screaming, huffing and puffing and looking around frantically with her eyes. It would have been way more convenient for the ship to not get destroyed 5 seconds into the battle and just have them land on the Covenant cruiser and begin their assault that way with the cool stuff, you know, the actual gunfight. Outside of this, the actual fights are pretty good, and when Master Chief is actually allowed to be Master Chief, his fight scenes are awesome, whether it's gunplay or him, you know, going toe-to-toe in melee combat essentially with elites and big brutes. Awesome stuff. Combat-wise, the Master Chief is badass. The rest of his character, though, still pretty bad. More on that soon. Now, the Reach plotline was my favorite part of the season. Episode 4, titled Reach, was the best episode in the entire show so far out of both seasons. It's pure Halo, along with a lot of emotional, high-stakes moments. It's almost purely an ongoing battle from start to finish, and a lot of big things happen. The Covenant kidnaps Cortana, we see the Covenant slaughter civilians, including Perez's family, we also have key character deaths, we learn along the way that the Spartans and basically the people of Reach were betrayed by their own kind, and ultimately, Reach is lost. This was an intense and emotional episode. I was genuinely sad to see Keyes and Vanek die. And I'll admit, at the end of the episode, during the credits, I kind of just sat there for a minute reflecting on what I just watched. It took a while for me to have that soak in, and that's a sign of a good episode. I'll give them that. Like I said, it was the best episode of not only this season, but the entire series. Sadly, good things in this show don't last. The rushed but epic conclusion of the Reach plot was followed with a super slow episode 5, which was very boring. Of course, we need to see the aftermath of the battle and how these characters deal with the death of comrades, but the whole episode is basically dedicated to trying to have a funeral for Vanek, and Riz healing only to realize that she doesn't want to be a Spartan anymore. And actually, we now know why the Reach plotline was pretty quick, because Kiki Wolfkill, the show's executive producer, and she was also the executive producer at 343 for Halo 4, she explained that budget restrictions were the reason why the Battle of Reach lasted just one episode. And I had a feeling money was the reason for this, and I get that this is a business, so you can only get so much money to work with, but again, in my opinion, a big IP like Halo should be a show that Paramount really invests in, and it's frustrating to see big companies like Paramount or even Disney with Marvel and Star Wars, they force their directors, writers, and producers to work with these small sets, and they give them far fewer resources than expected or deserved. This is the one time where I kind of want to defend the creators of the show, because you can only work with what you're given, and I get that. And like I said, it's silly that these big media companies can't invest right in a show like this. But I also look back at some of the other characters and storylines that are present in this show, and it's kind of a waste. Like the Soren and his family, do they really need to have a storyline be so prevalent in this show? The death of Soren's wife hit hard, but a lot of screen time was wasted in those first 2 seasons regarding him and his adventures. I think it's cool that he is now in the fold with Chief in this conflict, but what is his ultimate purpose? I guess we'll find out, and again, I like the character, I like the actor, but I just don't know how much of that needed to be in this show. And I'm not the biggest fan of Kwan either, but it appears she's going to be around because she is also very important to the show's plot. But the problem with all these mini plot lines is that it's screwing up the pacing and momentum of the show. This show does have some great moments, but they are usually followed by 10 minutes of who cares stuff. The show's narrative is bloated, there's too much going on, and the focus is not where it needs to be. The 3 characters, in my opinion, that really need to be focused on in this show are Master Chief, Cortana, and Dr. Halsey. Chief and Cortana are no-brainers, but I also want to learn more about what Halsey is doing. I want to learn more about the Chief and Halsey and the UNSC and Oni. Like, now's the time to add more lore to the franchise and explain some stuff that's already known, but maybe not known in complete detail because the games, didn't focus on some of these things. But the goal for this show, apparently, is to change things, to rewrite the lore, which is complete bullshit in my opinion. My biggest problem with the show is how Master Chief and the other Spartans were portrayed. Image-wise, they're butchered. It's crazy to see how we continue to see Master Chief shirtless and helmetless more than we see him in his armor. And Chief and his squad actually had their armor stolen by Ackerson. So the narrative is literally written to go against what makes Halo what it is and go against what Spartans are. Can we just get a war show? Can we get a show about badass super soldiers and how they save humanity against 2 huge threats, the Covenant and now the Flood, which were introduced at the end of the season? Do I really need to see Master Chief's face and biceps constantly? I will say this though, I have no issues with the cast of this show. They all give great performances. I know Pablo had said some things that have angered fans in the past. I mean, I don't really have any real issues with him, but I can acknowledge that he has quotes that kind of flip-flop. One minute he's defending the direction of the show and the decisions like him not wearing his helmet, but then the next minute he's talking about how excited he was for season 2 and the new direction that the show was going with the new showrunner. He even said that he was against the sex scene in season 1 and that he voiced his concerns with the creators about it, and of course they ignored him. Like I said earlier, I wish the Spartans were written to be the badass super soldiers that they were in the games. Master Chief is a quiet character who keeps to himself in most situations, especially during combat because, well, he's focused on being a deadly warrior. But he does have some great moments too that provide more to the character than just being a soldier. Obviously, his relationship with Cortana is the best example you could give. His relationship with her grows over time throughout the games. We see a glimpse of the human side of him through his interactions with her. And we can see, even through the suit, when he's upset and dealing with emotions, like when Cortana sacrificed herself to save him in the emotional ending of Halo 4. Halo Infinite may not have been the best campaign out there in the series, but there is one cutscene that stands tall among many other cutscenes throughout the history of the franchise. Chief's conversation with the pilot late in the game to basically pick him up and motivate him was one of the greatest interactions we saw with him, interacting and dealing with another person. And again, to me, it adds more to his character by displaying some sort of human interaction. And honestly, this is why I'm extremely disappointed in Kiki Wolfkill. She went from being the executive producer of Halo 4 and working with 343 to becoming the executive producer of this show, and yet both things are polar opposites of each other. Now I wonder, was she against the way they did things, or did she support it? She did defend Season 1 after all the backlash that the show received when it came out, so there is technically proof of her being in favor of the show's creative direction. And look, I don't want the show to be a retelling of the games, I want new things. But that doesn't mean that they should rewrite the lore and rewrite the characters. It kinda sucks that the Spartans are at odds with Oni and the UNSC, especially since Spartans are supposed to be the saviors of humanity. That's a big change from the games to the show. And it's been a while since I talked about the Covenant. That brings me to another point. Did you see the show's Arbiter? Did you know that he isn't the same from the game? He's a completely different character, different name, different everything. And why is that? What a missed opportunity to have him in the show and actually provide some focus on him. Halo 2's storytelling for the Arbiter was great. I also would have liked to have seen more of that priest that was on the ship with the Arbiter and McKee. What is his significance to the way the Covenant does things? Are these priests always on these ships managing what the army does? Like, is he the high priest of, this religious group that the Covenant are? Like, a cool character that's here for 5 minutes and then that's it. Now, speaking of missing characters, where's Sergeant Johnson? You want some other characters with more personality compared to the Spartans to counter that quietness and stoicness that you get from a character like Master Chief? Then you get loudmouth Sergeant Johnson. You fill in other characters with big personality. And again, outside of McKee and the Arbiter, we don't really learn much about the Covenant in this season. Like, there's the plot lines that are interesting or should be interesting are the ones that they just kind of leave behind. Now, we were introduced to the Flood, which was cool at the end of the season. I know some people had issues with that because, of course, the Flood was written differently compared to the actual lore, but for me, not a big problem. My only issue is that the infected humans kind of looked more like zombies, and they reminded me of basically the zombies and the clickers in, say, like The Last of Us. So a little bit too similar to what we see in other franchises. I hate how Cortana was hardly used in the show. I understand why she was used the way she was, because, she was kidnapped, she wasn't with Chief for that long or anything, but like, man, when they were together near the end of the season, that was cool. Like, and just in general, like, she's one of the biggest characters in this franchise. I would have loved to have seen her more and not used sparingly. I also love how the creators thought they needed to change the way she looked. Like, that was not a problem that needed to be addressed from Season 1. But hey, I'm glad I didn't have to see Master Chief's butt again or have to see him have sex, but I am so tired of seeing his face. It's not just because I believe he needs to stay in his armor, but it's also because I'm tired of seeing his cranky-ass facial expressions. He's always moody, and I understand why in the purpose of this story, but again, there's more personality added to this character than there needs to be. The mythology of this show is also confusing. Master Chief and McKee have this unique connection with the Halo and the artifacts. Honestly, it sucks how all of the Spartans are treated in this show. They're all portrayed to be weak. Almost every Spartan in the show gets severely wounded or killed. The other Spartan squad that was killed prior to Reach is a perfect example. It's one thing for them to get killed. It kind of hypes up the tension of, hey, the Covenant are getting stronger, they're getting bolder, and there's an invasion coming. But the fact that they were killed instantly in the ambush is lame. Like, they were literally killed without even firing a shot. But they're super soldiers. They're supposed to be the best of the best, and they didn't even go down fighting. The Spartan 3s that Kai trained seem to be more like Marines than Spartans. I know they are newly trained soldiers and they're a different type of Spartan, but where are any of the badass Spartans in this show? They don't appear to exist in this show's universe, apparently. But honestly, after 2 seasons, I'm still confused with a lot of this plot. We learn near the end of the season that Quan has some sort of connection to the Flood. It's just weird and confusing because, again, there's so many storylines going on in this show, I was having a hard time keeping up. They did set up things for Season 3, which I'm sure we're going to learn more about, but I don't feel great about being this confused 2 seasons into the show now. The Halo show ultimately gives off a mixed bag of emotions. One minute there's a cool combat scene or a great moment between some characters, and then the next moment it loses all that momentum for a scene that focuses on some other plotline that shouldn't even exist. I'm all for new characters and stories that add to the lore, but you should not change the lore and rewrite the characters like they did here. Season 2 is a lot better than Season 1 in my opinion. I enjoyed parts of this season, just like in 1, but they doubled down on a lot of the shitty things, and that's why I think this show is still not celebrated by many people like it should be. Despite being so negative about this show, I do hope we get a Season 3. I still want to see where they go with this stuff. I really don't find this show to be unwatchable. I don't love it, but I'm kind of just like, what the hell, let's see where it goes. I don't really recommend the show to hardcore Halo fans that would perhaps despise a change in lore like this, but if you can handle a show that you really don't like, then sure, you could check it out. If I had to go back and think on how I would rate Season 1, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. Season 2 is a little better. I'd give it a 7 out of 10, but it's not a very happy 7. Well, that's how I feel about Season 2 of the Halo show. Did you watch it? Give me your thoughts. I'm curious to see what you guys thought about it. And of course, go check out other videos on the channel and consider subscribing. You can also find my content in audio form on podcasting platforms. Just Google Analyze This Podcast. I'm on places like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also find me on X and TikTok, X at AnalyzeThis_YT, and TikTok at AnalyzeThis54_YT. Thanks again, and take care.